Hello and welcome to the 9th edition of AviaDev Insight Connectivity Update, the podcast offering an insight into the new route development in Africa. I'm Jon Howell, the CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa, a platform dedicated to supporting the development of new air routes to, from and within the African continent. Our June hiatus was due to the delivery of our annual event, AviaDev Africa, which took place in Windhoek, Namibia. It attracted over 500 delegates from 45 countries globally. Across 3 days, we delivered over 1,200 pre-arranged meetings, many of which will go some way to launching some of the new routes that we're going to discuss in the coming months. That's at least our hope. We had almost 40 airlines in attendance, around 25 airline CEOs as well. So the right people in the room to make the decisions and make those route planning decisions that are going to obviously deliver the connectivity that Africa deserves. Now, this podcast is your roundup of the latest route development news and analysis that impacts our great industry, including where routes or frequencies have been reduced or dropped as well. As always, I can't do this alone, and as each month I enlist the support of two industry experts to make sense of the announcements and provide a bit of commentary. As always, Chief Regional Troublemaker Sean Mendis is with us. He is bringing his potent mix of candor, knowledge and wit to the table. I'm sure by now Sean is familiar to most of our listeners, but for those of us joining for the first time, he's an AviaDev Advisory Board member. He's an av geek, he's a friend of ours, and he brings over 20 years of experience in the industry, including managing airports, commercial airlines and cargo airlines in Africa and the Middle East, and also a lot of startup experience too. Our second guest is Behramjee Ghadially, who is an aviation consultant with over 20 years of experience supporting airlines globally with their network planning and strategy. He's very vocal and visible on LinkedIn, especially from a social media perspective. And he's spent over 9 years working on the African continent with multiple airlines, a real Africa specialist. As always, the opinions of my guests are their own, but as you will hear, they are backed up by compelling reasoning. And you will find out all about that today. So it's now time to fasten your seatbelts as we start our taxi out, and welcome to the July 2024 AviaDev Insight Connectivity Update. Right. Let's get going, and welcome back to the podcast, both of you. It's great to have you back with us and great to be back after a few weeks rest.
Thank you.
Some of us had to get back to actual work after a lovely conference, but hey, such is good.
Perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to get stuck in with a carrier that attended AviaDev Africa for the very first time and is making a foray into the market, into the African market. This was announced the week after AviaDev. So I think we were all aware of this coming, but the actual announcement and the route that was loaded happened straight after AviaDev. That is, AirAsia are going to start Kuala Lumpur Nairobi direct, and their first flight will be the 15th of November 2024. It will be a 4-weekly flight on an A330-300. For those of you who don't know AirAsia, their planes and this particular aircraft is configured with 12 business class and 365 economy seats. So high density, I see shooting at that. But I think I'd like to start with you, Behramjee, just to kick us off on this one because you were quite vocal. You've got some commentary on this. So what do you think about this? What do you think about the route? What do you think about the airline's new focus on Africa? And do you think it'll be successful?
Thank you, John. Hello, Sean. So AirAsia is not new to Africa, but it is new to mainland Africa. They tried to serve Africa about 8 years ago with their Mauritius service. And before AirAsia, Malaysian Airlines used to fly to Johannesburg and Cape Town in the 1990s all the way till 9/11. They used to extend that flight to Buenos Aires, if I'm not mistaken. So this would be actually the second Malaysian carrier trying to enter Africa. Unfortunately, I don't see that much long-term or even short-term potential for AirAsia X on this route. Just to differentiate, this is AirAsia X, the long-haul division of AirAsia that's going to be flying this route. The reason why I'm a bit pessimistic about them on this route is because, number one, it's a 9-hour flight from Kuala Lumpur, and the point-to-point market, which forms the base load of any long-haul service, is less than 10,000 passengers per year. Secondly, they are using a 377-seater aircraft, which is no joke. if they were using an aircraft the size of a 310 or a 767-200, then maybe I would not be too pessimistic. But this is a proper big aircraft which will not be easy to sell and not to fill up, no matter where they might get their feed from. Because at the end of the day, the top 15 markets that are relevant in Asia for Nairobi total up to be 202,000 passengers a year, with the biggest market being Guangzhou via Kuala Lumpur, which is 48,000 passengers a year. And Kenya Airways already flies that route 5 times a week via Bangkok. So I do not think flying 4 times a week, that too from the onset, is going to be fruitful for them. They've tried to do long haul in the past with Europe, Honolulu, and that unfortunately failed for them. When it comes to markets beyond Kuala Lumpur, China is obviously going to be the number one market focus. But again, the volume is not there for Nairobi to Asia. And already from Nairobi, you have Kenya Airways in China, in Thailand, plus they have their code shares with other multiple carriers. And also you have multiple one-stop options via the Middle East and Addis Ababa to cater to that demand. So it is a very risky move, and I do not see it doing well for them. It's going to be very painful, especially with a 4 weekly service, because it's not like they can dedicate one full aircraft. They will have to, for one full aircraft, depending on their hub structure. That might be possible, but it doesn't look too good to me.
Yeah. So I'm going to come to you, Sean, for your thoughts on this. But of course, we're back on that conversation that we had a few weeks ago about North Atlantic with the long haul low cost. It's a slightly different product, but long haul low cost, does it ever work anywhere? But the other thing that I wanted to get your thoughts on was how aggressive they've been with their launch. I think the launch fee for this first flight is zero. They're very much going back to their roots in terms of trying to stimulate the demand with a real kind of shock fare. So your thoughts on this and how it would impact KQ, because of course they've got strong market presence in Asia. This is a real challenger for that, for those traders that want a cheap and easy way to get into the market.
Okay, it's an interesting one. I had a chance to meet up with the AirAsia team in Windhoek at AviaDev a few weeks ago, and I'm not saying anything here that I didn't say to their faces, and I think the net summary of what I said to them was, you're delusional if you think this is going to work. The reality of the situation is they are not prepared for Africa. I think their entire strategy in terms of high volume, low unit cost works in markets where you can realistically stimulate demand, but long haul to and from Africa to Asia is not market stimulation as much as it is an existing market of traders and business and that kind of traffic, which is can only be stimulated a certain amount. Beyond that, the distribution, while it works brilliantly in Asia because it has been tailored to that market, is going to fail woefully in Africa. To this point, I was talking just this week to some agents in Kenya and people in the travel space there. They don't know how to book this. They've not had approaches from AirAsia. They've not been... They see AirAsia as coming, but this is not something that's in GDS. This is not something that the current channels which the demand from Kenya to Asia is flowing through, it's not visible, it's not able to be sold through those channels. Certainly people can go to AirAsia's website and buy the ticket there, but that's not how the traders do it. And I think this could wind up being a lesson to them that their model is not exportable. But to be fair, they've had this lesson, as Behramjee pointed out, with multiple previous attempts with low-cost long haul. I think for this to even have a chance of working, you need to not look at this as Kuala Lumpur to Nairobi. You need to look at this as Southeast Asia to Nairobi. Even then, the market is very marginal. You're going to have to stimulate the market with the Southeast Asia point of sale and as an origin point. And quite honestly, I don't see people from Malaysia and Vietnam and Singapore and places like that suddenly clamoring to come to Nairobi. They also need a feed beyond the gateway in Nairobi. And obviously that is not going to come from Kenya Airways or JamboJet because they're straight up in competition with them. We know that they've talked about potential other partners, but there is nobody yet in Kenya who has a network that could conceivably be any type of feeder. And once again, when they start relying on external partners, this is not something that AirAsia Group has ever been able to do successfully before. What worries me is the fact that they're trying to do something that didn't work for them before, do the same thing in a different market and hope for a different result. And that is the textbook definition of insanity. So I'd love to see it succeed. I do not see it succeeding in its current avatar. In fact, I'd go far as to say that there's probably a 30% chance these flights never fly. I think that when they see how badly the pre-sales are doing by October, they're probably even going to pull a plug before it even flies. But 30% chance on that. I'll put $10 on it if someone wants to take the money.
Behramjee?
Yes, there's also. Thank you, Sean, for that detailed explanation. There's one point which both of us missed out on, is the baggage allowance also. Routes like Africa to Guangzhou and to other cities in Africa as well as Bangkok require at least two-piece baggage allowance to be attractive to traders, because places like Bangkok and Guangzhou in particular have a higher African point of sale origin versus Southeast Asia point of sale origin. And those routes in particular require an attractive baggage allowance, which the Middle East carriers and Ethiopian Airlines provide free two-piece baggage. I don't think AirAsia X will be providing free two-piece baggage allowance to its passengers.
No, I disagree with you on that. I think that at the end of the day, what free allowance you provide versus giving a free ticket and paying for baggage allowance, the net cost will wind up being the determining factor. So I don't think a trader will really care if they're paying $0 for the ticket and $200 for two pieces of baggage versus $200 for the ticket and $0 for the baggage. I think the African market, and especially African travelers, and remember, the traders are the biggest travelers in Africa. These guys are all platinum and gold on every frequent flight. If you go to the lounge in Addis Ababa, 90% of that lounge in the evenings is the traders. So it's not they may not be the most sophisticated in terms of their booking abilities and so forth to go to websites and the like, but they understand the economics and the services that are being provided in their tickets. And so I don't think that will be as much of an issue as long as the net pricing inclusive of baggage winds up being attractive overall. So I think that is different. And to point out what John was saying, I think the real difference between Norse's attempt at Cape Town to Gatwick versus this one, Kuala Lumpur to Nairobi, is that Cape Town to Gatwick is a humongous O&D market, and especially so at the time of year when Norse is entering it. Norse is entering into a market that is spilling because non-stop capacity is not meeting the demand. AirAsia is coming into a market that doesn't exist yet, and trying to stimulate it to the point of having to fill 360 seats 4 times a week. Sorry, but as I said, this is delusional. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think all the points you've made are very clear, and I'm due to actually speak to Paul Carroll, the CCO of AirAsia, about this in the coming week or two on the podcast. So I will obviously put these points to him, and we'll hold his feet to the fire and see what he's saying about the reaction from the launch and everything else. I think to Behramjee's point as well, and we saw this with the low-cost revolution in Europe, etc., is you've got to change people's approach, where we're now very used to going to a website and seeing a €10 fare and then going, oh, okay, of course, I'm traveling with the family. I need 2 bags. I want to sit together. I want something to eat. And suddenly it creeps up. And we haven't had that model successfully implemented really outside of the South African market. And even there, it's relatively limited, right? So Sean's going to say, no, disagree.
I'm going to correct you on that, because JamboJet, and if you look at Fly 540 and all the low-cost carriers in Kenya, they actually led the South African market in trying to introduce it. Certainly the scale is a lot smaller, but I think Kenya, if anywhere, is a market that is very used to this, and Kenya Airways fares are pretty punitive as well in terms of no changes and very low baggage and like 3 green peas and a piece of rotten beef as the in-flight meal. I don't think the Kenya market is not going to be used to that. Kenya is a market. Kenya and South Africa would probably be the 2 markets I wouldn't really worry about trying this kind of thing. And as I said, JamboJet continues to grow from strength to strength in Kenya, and that is exactly what their model is. Absolute no frills, and charge them nothing and charge them for the rest.
Yeah, so in that case, I stand corrected, and thank you for pointing that out. And I think that's a good point to put to Paul at AirAsia. Is this is why Kenya, because you felt they were obviously ripe and ready for this kind of model. We know about M-Pesa and these different sort of disruptive technologies and mobile wallets, and it seems maybe he will say, look, this is a country that is obviously not afraid of doing things differently and is quite advanced in the way that it works in this sector. And that was an attractive element to it. Obviously, the geography makes sense as well. But I think the points you've made make a lot of sense. So we'll park that one. We'll watch it. And obviously, I will follow up with Paul directly. But let's stay in Kenya and let's go back to an airline you just talked about. And we did discuss this when it was first announced, but it's now been launched, which is Zanzibar 4 times a week with their Q400. We had the JamboJet, the CEO, and the whole of the network planning team again with us in AviaDev, and they were really excited about this market. And obviously, they had a big plan for expansion pre-pandemic into the region, and then have had to bide their time. But it's now operational. It's happening. It's a couple of weeks in. How do we see this? Just to recap it, and it's a very interesting route in terms of they're both traditionally very much long haul international tourism destinations as much as anything else, and there's trading there and this, that, and the other. But how do you see it? Who wants to take this one? Whoever wants to go first on.
Let Behramjee go first on this because I know he's got numbers, and then I'll come in with a bigger picture overview. Behramjee, go with your numbers.
Yes, I was just opening my Excel sheet on that. So in 2023, the point-to-point market size between Zanzibar and Mombasa showed to be 43,288 passengers, paying an average fare $180 one way. And it's it's a short-haul route, so the point-to-point market is there. Yes, as you mentioned, John, it's 2 beach towns, but both towns are very notorious trading centers for both countries because it's a main port of call. Right now, Sean, nobody flies it non-stop. Am I correct? Between the two cities?
Well, JamboJet does now, but
Before they would start.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Precision might have at some point, but not something that was particularly consistent.
yeah, so with
Precision's route
already
network
such a
changes
big
on.
with such a big point-to-point market for a regional Africa service, they will definitely stimulate it more. But by offering a non-stop service, that will make it much more convenient and attractive for passengers to go back and forth, no doubt. Plus, as Sean mentioned earlier on, since these two destinations are very popular with beach tourists also, especially from Europe, passengers can do open jaw journeys, fly in from one country and fly out from the other as well. And plus, flying a Q400 between the two cities, the costs are very low, so the risk factor is very low. And plus, the point-to-point market is already there, established. I foresee this route doing well for them, and hopefully it'll get good feed from Kenya Airways codeshare as well, if they do codeshare on this route at the end of the day. But I don't see any problems in the future going forward for them.
No, I agree. I think this is in every business model you have these low-hanging fruit that you just have to go and grab as soon as you see them, and I think this is one of those for JamboJet. As Behramjee says, the market is there. It's their home market. It's a no-brainer to at least give it a shot. So I'm very confident that they'll make a success of this given their track record. But I think it's interesting to look at JamboJet in general and where it fits into in the Kenya Airways group strategy in that respect, because obviously JamboJet has grown well. It has become one of the few successes within the general Kenya Airways restructuring, so to speak. Kenya Airways, the parent carrier, the legacy carrier, while it is operationally profitable, as Martin Gitonga keeps stressing, it still is burdened by legacy debt and with the inability to deliver the business plan that has been envisioned. The problem that JamboJet has is they are operating Q400s. And Q400s, while they are a wonderful machine for the mission that they're currently deployed on, there are two big issues. Number one, they're running out of markets that they could potentially serve with the Q400 efficiently from Kenya. They're not just Nairobi. Obviously, they're moved out of just Nairobi possibilities by looking at a Mombasa Zanzibar. But beyond that, the world is running out of Q400s. This is an aircraft that is no longer in production, and despite all these pie-in-the-sky promises from de Havilland, I don't actually see them ever restarting again. Plus, this is a some of these frames are 30, 40 years old. They're not the cheapest to maintain. They're not the most reliable out there. So I think JamboJet is going to have a very big come to Jesus moment sometime. Well, they're already having it. I know that the rumors have been around for the last year plus in terms of having to refleet, because the ability for JamboJet to continue running Q400s and maintain this single fleet low cost model is running out. And low cost airlines continue to be sustainable by growth. And when that growth slows or that growth stops, your cost structure, your unit costs begin going up, because you don't have that expansion to keep driving your drive of cost reduction. And that becomes a tricky thing for them. So I think it's good that JamboJet is doing this. It moves away from their traditional Nairobi to every town with a runway in Kenya kind of model. But at the same time, I think it also signifies that JamboJet is having to basically relook at what its existential strategy is going to be, because there is a hard limit on where the current strategy is going to wind up, and they're approaching it very quickly.
Yeah, so I guess while we're on it, we may as well just have that conversation. So the options from a fleet perspective are try and get some newer Q400s that are maybe lower on the maintenance cost, or, before you answer that one, Sean, or take some of these E-jets that KQ want to get rid of, and then KQ can, if they can find the money, can invest in something new, something bigger maybe.
We know that's what has been discussed for months and years right now. The issue, though, is KQ's got a mess in terms of their Embraer leases. It's all over the board. The lessors have changed. Lessors have entered bankruptcy, COVID, aircraft are stuck in maintenance in places, registration, deregistration. While I think that may have been something that would have been easier to accomplish if everything had been a nice clean, such as, KQ owns these and they can just pass them on to them, or a lease can just be transferred over. KQ's got a mess with their own leases, and I think that is something that JamboJet doesn't want to inherit a mess. They'd rather inherit a clean sheet. So it may still happen. If it depends on JamboJet's strategy. Is JamboJet going to go wider than just the near region? If they're going to go wider than just the near region, then probably they'll be able to get better utility out of the aircraft. They might need something with a longer range. So an A220 or an E2 might be something they're looking at. Do they have the capital to do that? Answer no. And especially with the current political issues in Kenya, there is no way in hell they're going to be able to put any sort of capital or guarantees forward for a JamboJet kind of thing. And JamboJet's balance sheet is not strong enough yet to be able to finance that themselves. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and that is a really tough position to be in. And new Dash 8s, whatever you say, the newest Dash 8s are getting older by the day. And that means the Dash 8 is a dead end. The question is how far away that dead end is, and it's nearer than you think it is.
Yeah, but I suppose the way we'd leave it is they're doing the best they can with what they've got. This route we've all agreed is really a good idea, and let's continue everything else going on in the background. And you've pointed out we focus very heavily in the first 20 minutes here on Kenya as a market, and obviously the political situation there will impact demand, will impact the ability to raise finance, will impact everything when it comes to the strategy here. And it is a bit of a wait and see at the moment, and we just hope that obviously resolves itself in the best way possible. But also, of course, we focused on Zanzibar there, which is going to be the host of AviaDev next year, 11th to 13th of June. So we're really excited to obviously bring the AviaDev community to Zanzibar. And that takes us to the next route, which is Air France, who've announced Kilimanjaro. Now, they've announced Kilimanjaro starting November 18th, 2024. So you'll see so many of these routes that we've talked about are coming in October, November, etc. It's a particular season when they're able to deploy this capacity. So that's going to be 3 flights a week on an A350-900. And it's actually an extension of the existing Zanzibar route as well. So this is, again, another carrier that serves Zanzibar, another partner of ours at AviaDev. So what do we think about this one? Air France, Kilimanjaro, starting in November. Behramjee, do you want to start with this one? You got any numbers for us? I know you mentioned some stuff on LinkedIn.
Yes. Firstly, just...
Does Behramjee have numbers? That is the Pope Catholic? Would you like some water to drink to keep alive? Things as such. Go on, Behramjee.
Just
treat us MIDT.
No. Listen, just one thing. Is this service a winter seasonal or is it year-round? Because I've not gotten clarification on that.
I don't know.
Because on the GDS, I'm only seeing it I'm only seeing it till March. I'm not seeing it beyond, unless they've not updated
It's
it.
quite possible that it will be seasonal at the start, but let Sean have a little look while you give us some of the numbers.
Okay, sure. So to begin with, first, like I posted on my LinkedIn story, Tanzania now will have 3 cities served by Air France, and that will be the only country below the Maghreb region in Africa to have that distinction. So kudos to Tanzania and for Air France to see the potential in that country for their market. To begin with, Kilimanjaro to Paris, which is the home base of Air France, already has a very big point to point market of 51,273 passengers, which flew it last year. In total, France to Tanzania last year was about 205,000 passengers. So, already a big market, with Zanzibar and Kilimanjaro having about 88% of that market. As far as other cities are concerned beyond Paris, because it's not going to only focus on the point to point market, the big volume markets are Frankfurt with 36,000, Amsterdam 33,000, London 22,000, Zurich 20,000, Brussels 16,000, Madrid and Geneva coming in at 12,000 each. And so those are good volume sized markets. And also the fact that this route is combined with Zanzibar, which is already a very high volume route. So I don't see loads being an issue. I don't see yields also being an issue because it's a winter seasonal route, and that's when the Europeans like to come to these beach tourism destinations to escape the cold winters of Europe. Plus, if you go to Kilimanjaro, you're going for a safari, and safaris are not cheap. You're going to be paying at least $200 to $250 a night for a hotel in Kilimanjaro, which would be a 3 to 4 star hotel. Plus, you'll be paying a minimum of $100 a day per person to go on a safari. So it's not like a typical Paris to Bangkok or Paris to Kuala Lumpur type route where the yields are very low and backpackers would be going. These are proper middle class, upper middle class passengers who have spare disposable income to spend on a very luxurious or semi-luxurious holiday. They're going to be using the A350-900, so the operating costs of the route will also be quite attractive because that aircraft is quite attractive from a fuel performance point of view. And the good thing is, again, it's combined with Zanzibar, so the loads will not be a problem. When it comes to belly cargo, I don't see that much belly cargo demand for both the routes, but that's not the main aim. The main aim is to get the high-end leisure tourist passengers on this route. So the good thing is, as we were talking about the AirAsia thing to Nairobi, over here you have a set base load for point-to-point demand, as well as very good beyond traffic as well in good volume. And plus, Air France, along with its partner KLM, is a trusted brand in Tanzania. So I don't see any issues with that. And also, vast majority of the point of sale will be in Europe. So the currency issue will not be a problem for Air France as well, since majority of the sale will be done in euros or dollars.
Yeah, great. Anything to add, Sean? Have you done any checking? We got any idea, or is it just loaded for winter at the moment?
The flights are loaded till the flights are on sale through the end of winter schedule. Beyond that, I note that even the Zanzibar flights are zeroed out completely for next summer. So the reality is the flight is loaded for both Zanzibar and Jaro till end of March. And then starting April, Kilimanjaro is not loaded and Zanzibar is not sold. So definitely it hints at seasonality or a decision to be made about seasonality depending on performance. But I think that is actually the point that I was going to make over here, which is, before I even looked at those numbers, is that what we're seeing over here is a trend from the European carriers in particular to move more and more of their capacity towards seasonality and seeing Africa as a potential market for this seasonal deployment. In North America in particular is where they make their big money on these wide bodies in summer, fill up 30, I think British Airways is doing 47 times a day to the US from Heathrow now. Air France has got 30-something flights. These are ridiculously high numbers that they're throwing on the transatlantic routes in summer, but you can't fill all of those in winter. And consequently, where do you deploy this expensive brand new metal to get enough flying hours into it to at least break even on it so that your profit taking in the summer works? The answer is Africa makes sense. And Africa being not as much in terms of business travel necessarily, which has been traditionally where Air France has gone into it. But then if you look in terms of Lufthansa's strategy with Discover and Lufthansa's focus again of building into a lot of these African premium leisure markets, so to speak, whether that's going to be the Victoria Falls, the Namibias, back into Nairobi and things as such, I think we've definitely seen this as a trend. I think of the three major European airline groups, the Lufthansa Group and Air France-KLM have clearly made the strategy. I think we would probably, subject to them being able to figure out how to do it, because they're not usually very innovative. I think IAG might be seen. IAG needs to make a similar move to be competitive with that, and I don't quite know how they do it. I think just looking in terms of what a trend might be, I think these African premium leisure routes will become flavor of the week. Maybe not. We're already seeing it as flavor of the week somehow for last year and this year, but I think we might see this as we come into winter of 2020, about 18 months from now. I think we might see a few more of these and a bit more competition in these. And will that be sustainable? Will it not be sustainable? Time will tell, depending on who comes in and how responsibly they choose to come into the market. So that's my big picture view on it. I don't think we know the Air France network planning team. Unfortunately, they weren't in Namibia, but they've been great supporters. And I think just as a big shout out to AviaDev, we know that a big chunk of their East African expansion has been driven by meetings they've had at AviaDev. Stephanie said as much in testimonials and so forth. So the stuff we discuss here, the stuff that happens at AviaDev, it has real world impact and it creates the full circle. We talk about it, they do it, and we talk about it again.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, checks in the post, absolutely. So I think you make a really interesting point. I just want to focus in on from an AviaDev perspective and somebody who's obviously trying to get these carriers to come to Africa. So those three big groups, you've got IAG, you've got Air France and KLM, and then you've got, of course, the Lufthansa group. So they're very different. So for me, the Lufthansa group and Air France obviously are head and shoulders. So what the Lufthansa group did is create the Discover brand as a separate brand to serve Mombasa, Zanzibar, Vic Falls, Windhoek. They even served Kruger at one point as well. So the premium leisure destinations with a specific brand, which you book through the Lufthansa website. Then in the middle, you've got Air France that have obviously now started to do this as well and have a real Africa strategy, but they haven't gone down the road they went down a few years ago and created their own brand. If you remember, June, I think it was called, JOON, was their, I don't know, at the time, millennial Generation X type setup. And that used to be like Cape Town, right? And they discontinued that. So they've said, no, we're just going to use the Air France brand, but we're going to serve these markets. And then last, we've got IAG, who are never interested in coming to AviaDev, don't seem to be interested in developing Africa at all. And if anybody out there from that group is listening, you get invited every year. You don't show any interest. You'd like to fix on the markets you've got. And there is an opportunity here for you to deploy that capacity that you're throwing into the transatlantic market that Sean's saying, in the winter season. Come and have a look, come and have a conversation, because these markets exist. They're working for these other carriers. And by you not looking at it, I think that's remiss, but maybe that's just, there isn't much of an Africa strategy. And that's always been the impact. And the response I've had from that group is no response. Simple as that. Hey, we'll just focus on the routes that make us money. I don't know what you think on that.
At the risk of hurting your feelings, John, unfortunately, that is quite a British feeling that Africa is there to be colonized, not to be developed. So I think IAG's and British Airways' Africa strategy is much in that respect. They have the markets which they are dominant in, the Accras, the Lagoses, the Nairobis, the Johannesburgs and Cape Towns, and they're happy to sit on their laurels, exploit those markets as much as they can and not look to develop their presence elsewhere. And that's a disappointment, because at the end of the day, much as it has the British economy in general, it'll come back and bite them.
And what about Virgin? What a great opportunity, seen as such a innovative leisure top-end carrier by the Brits. Why wouldn't they look at innovating and serving some of these markets?
A very simple answer, because the lack of Heathrow
Yes.
slots. Virgin has limited
Yes.
resources and able to be expanding at Heathrow. And quite honestly, if you get a Heathrow slot, you make more money flying another frequency to New York than you would in experimenting and taking losses for 2 years and starting an Entebbe or a Harare or whatever else, because it doesn't deliver the return on investment fast enough that you would be able to in a market you're already established in. So Virgin is a very different story than IAG. IAG is a group. IAG doesn't just have London, it has Madrid, it's got a range of options in terms of how it can serve these, and it has been singularly unimaginative or uncreative, and it sits on its laurels. It sits on the fact that it dominates London Heathrow, and it'll always make a profit from operations at London Heathrow as long as they keep everybody else out. Again, I hate to say it, but it is a legacy colonial mindset. We have what we have, and that's the way it's going to be, and let everybody else run around, and at the end, just like Empire, it will fail.
Yeah, I think that's really clear, and obviously is my lived experience as well. So we'll park that one before they revoke my passport, although obviously it's not a national carrier now, so I think I'm okay to say what I want in that. It's just you can sense the frustration. Yeah. Let's go back to AviaDev 2024 host, Namibia, because so much has been happening. We've gone from East Coast now. Let's go over to the West side. We've talked about Discover already. So Discover are going to start a sort of twin hub strategy they're flying 10 times a week from Frankfurt to Windhoek. They're going to split some of those frequencies and start from Munich. But the big one and the partner that we work with locally is FlyNamibia. And FlyNamibia have launched Maun in Botswana on the 3rd of July. So I think we've talked about this because it was loaded, but now it's launched. 3 times a week, they're going to fly from Windhoek to Maun on an ERJ 145 and Embraer regional jet. I think it would be good to get a bit of context on this one, whoever wants to take the lead on FlyNamibia.
Let Sean handle this.
I'll take the lead on this one because I don't think it's a good idea. I think FlyNamibia, while certainly it may be successful in the short term, I think it shows that there probably is a strategy in the background that I'm not seeing or that I disagree with. But the reality is Windhoek to Maun is not a market that serves their home market. It is a market that is designed to serve passengers who are entering the region as tourists coming in, whether they're coming in on Airlines flights from Cape Town and then continuing on to Botswana after Namibia, or coming in from Discover into Namibia and then looking at extending their holidays elsewhere. But when you are trying to build your expansion, and remember, FlyNamibia is a tiny carrier. They are a tiny carrier in a marginal market. Existentialism they have existential threats. One bad route can bring the whole house of cards collapsing, even despite Roger Foster's 40% backing now. And I think that trying to get into a market that doesn't have a solid O&D base is a very risky thing. If I were them, and again, I'm not them. I've run airlines in similar situations, though. Airlines which have had similar fleets and have had similar challenges. My core principle has always been focus on your home market's needs as your priority. Because when things go sour, when there is a problem, an economic issue in Europe, for example, you don't want your Windhoek to Maun route to struggle because of something completely out of not just your control, but out of your sphere of influence. While your home market, you have the ability to draw upon, you have the ability to dominate, which is important. Right now, they're in a monopoly situation with competition in due course, and competition will arise in due course. Whether it's good competition, bad competition, government competition, we'll see. You don't want to be at the mercy of external players for your key markets when you should be that. So if it were me, I'd have been looking at the Harares, I'd have been looking at the Durbans and stuff, which Andre has said he's interested in. But the fact that Maun has been the first of these that really has come to fruition. Second, I think Vic Falls was the first. But it's the same logic. The fact that they're focusing on the touristy routes, which are dependent upon non-local traffic rather than the routes which could potentially stimulate economy, the routes that could be stimulated by local demand. It's not what I would do, and I think it is a strategy that, if things go wrong, could wind up biting them in the ass. And I hope not, because they're a really good operation with some good people there, and I wish them every success.
Yeah, I love the airline and I love the people behind it. And I think the idea is really good. And for anybody who's interested in more context, there are two interviews on the AviaDev YouTube channel. One is Tim Harris interviewing Andre, the CEO, during AviaDev. It's only 15 minutes, but it's there, it's freely available. And the other one is I ran a session at the following event, the Hotel Investment Forum, which was with both Bissy, who is the CEO of NAC, of the airport company, and Andre from FlyNamibia, the MD. And look, in essence, it's such a tough market. It's very thin. It's a gigantic country. So you've got long sectors with very limited demand. And their only way of growing is through these partnerships. They need to connect in with, if they're going to serve a tourism market, and that's going to be part of their market outside of the domestic, they're going to have to work with these guys and Interline and CodeShare to try and get these people to their end destination and to move them around the region. So it's a work in progress. And as you said, Sean, the first foray was Vic Falls. Now they've gone to Maun. Airlink is coming in from Cape Town. They're getting feed in that respect, but it is really difficult market. So I think that if anybody is interested, they should go check out those interviews. You can hear it from the horse's mouth. And Andre is doing as much as he can. He's trying to be innovative in a very difficult market. Is there anything you want to add on this one, Behramjee, or should we move on?
No, nothing to add on this one.
Okay, fantastic. So you're not the Namibia expert I've become over the last year.
No.
I think we've all learned a lot about Namibia. That's credit to Namibia because they were very good hosts.
Exactly, and you can see it on my mug, those of you watching on YouTube as well.
The only thing about...
Since we're mentioning Namibia, I would be remiss if I did not get into a rant about Namibia's visa policies.
Oh, yeah, that's coming, loading. Sorry, Behramjee, you were going to say...
Yeah, the only thing I know about Namibia probably is Etosha National Park, because it's the only national park in the world where lions actually live on the beach.
I knew it would be a lion story. If
it's got to be a lion story, isn't it? Yeah. It's got to be a lion story.
It's the only park in the world where striped hyenas actually hunt seals.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That is cool, because there are a heck of a lot of seals. When I went to the coast, the amount of seals is crazy.
Yeah.
So there we go. A little bit of knowledge. You learn something every day. It's a school day when Behramjee and Sean are in the house. So that's good. Sean, I can see you getting excited about this. So we're going to talk about visas. Okay. And what happened is, and what I want to discuss is the impact of a change in visa regime on route planning, because of course, these is a very big part of the consideration of a carrier when it goes into a market, how easy it is to get access to the market, but how easy it is for travelers and how expensive it will be for them to enter a market. The first thing to say is that AviaDev was really successful for the airport company. We're not going to specify, but there could be 4 or 5 new routes or route expansions that are going to happen as a result of the event. However, we heard about 6-8 weeks before the event that the cabinet were looking at changing the visa regime in the country, and that's now been announced. So from the 1st of April 2025, there will be a 1,600 Namibian dollar visa fee payable on arrival. So you can still get visa on arrival, but you have to pay $1,600 per person for a visa on arrival for non-AU countries. They're all listed. I'm not going to go through them. And 1,200 Namibian dollars for AU resident countries. To give you an idea, put this into US dollar terms, it's about $90 US for non-AU and 67 US dollars per person. And it replaces a policy which was zero cost for these countries. So I'm not here to debate the merit of the policy and the political reasons or whatever the reasons are behind it. But I really want to understand, and you can bring that up if you want, Sean, but what I want to understand is, with your route planner hats on, the impact of hearing about something like this. If you were considering a route, how much is this going to make you look at it again and say, okay, maybe we've got to reconsider because this is going to have an impact on demand? So go, Sean, tell us about your experience and what you think.
Okay. Namibia, anyone who's followed my LinkedIn and believe me, I was surprised by the number of people who've actually read that post of mine over there because I got rejected for a Namibia visa because my invitation letter was addressed to a ministry whose name was changed in the last few months, and it was given to the old name of the Ministry of Home Affairs and Immigration rather than Home Affairs, Immigration, Safety and Security. So they initially rejected my Namibia visa for not updating the name of the ministry, which is fine. That is their prerogative. But it just sends the general message that Namibia has a very good product that they are able, that exists, but is a product that they are marketing woefully. And I think the way they have rolled out this whole visa thing is a perfect example of that. It is something which they are doing for the sake of doing rather than doing with a clear vision as to what their visa policy is for. The fact that Namibia's visa policy right now is, they claim, and again, this is quoting from what they have said, is based upon the principles of reciprocity. So they want to give visa-free access to Namibia to places that grant visa-free access to Namibians and then charge others for visas, which is a perfectly fair way of doing it. However, that is not the reality. The reality is they still have different categories of, these are non-AU countries, these are AU countries, these are visa-free countries, these are countries which can get e-visas, these are countries which need e-visas but must have security referrals, and so forth. They've taken something which could be simple and they made it complex, and that means they've lost the point of why they're doing this. Do I think that this particular case of introducing a visa on arrival charge is going to make a significant difference? No, I actually don't. I think that it's basically just a tax. The markets that are going to be affected by this are their very large source markets. But as we have discussed many times already, these are not backpacker destinations. These are premium leisure. So at the end of the day, the cost of your holiday is going up from 3,000 euros to 3,100 euros. And the reality is, if you're planning a trip to Namibia or you're planning a trip to Africa, which Namibia is part of it, that extra 60, 70 euros worth of costs, or whatever the exchange rate is on the day, is not going to move the needle significantly. Introducing the need to go to a Namibian embassy or something as such, that would probably have created demand completely. I think you'd probably have seen Discover pulling out of that market, or at least reducing to sub-daily frequencies rather than going forward in expansion. So I think as it stands right now, it is something which I don't think Namibia is quite sure whether they're doing it to raise revenue, or whether they're doing it to make a point, or whether they're doing it because they've just suddenly got this impulse to commit harakiri and screw their tourism industry. I really don't know why they think they're doing this. And I think that's the problem. Because I've discussed it with Namibia Tourism and with multiple people at Namibia Tourism from the top to the bottom, and none of them have a clue as to why it's happening. They're saying, oh, it's being imposed on us by cabinet. But the reality is, if you have a coherent strategy, nothing is imposed. It should be all stakeholders have discussed and have come to an agreement as to why it's happening. So I think that is where Namibia's main problem comes in. I think it is true of so many other African countries. I won't even start on Botswana because we've only got an hour and a little bit to go on this one, but I could rant about Botswana for 2 days. They seem to want to attract tourists, but at the same time, they seem to want to send tourists away. And that is a perfect way of ensuring you achieve the latter, because, John, you've been big about this whole net promoter score and things like that, but it only takes one positive response usually will affect one person, but one negative response affects 10. One bad story about Namibia immigration, I know this because I posted that I had a problem with Namibia visas, and I've had probably close to 100 people come up to me and say, oh, this and this and this. I also posted that I eventually got the visa, and I think maybe 5 people even noticed that I said that. And I think that says it all. People are going to look at the fact that Namibia has said, we're going to do this and we want to crack down, and say they're not really welcoming. And I think that will be the perception, maybe worse than the reality. The $100 or $90 or whatever, 1,600 Namibian dollars is not going to be the problem. The problem is the lack of coherence around the policy as to the why, as to what it actually means, the practicalities of it. That is where things are going to hurt Namibia and hurt so many other African countries who just chop and change their visa policies without any clear idea as to the why or the what. So if you read my latest column in Voyage Afrique magazine, June edition, another plug here for another supporter of the show, Kojo's magazine, I have written extensively on the incoherence of African visa policies on that. So check it out. It's on my LinkedIn. It's on Voyage Afrique website. Just Google Jon Mendis and Voyage Afrique, and you'll read that too.
Yeah, had a good read of that. So Behramjee, rather than talking about this one specifically, just give us your thoughts on visas and how that impacts. I'm sure it's something you obviously look at when you're looking at a new route, because there's no point if the demand exists but it's almost impossible to get a visa or it's prohibitively expensive, then only a certain number of people are going to do it. So how do you see it, and how has it impacted your decision making over the years?
Firstly, just want to clarify, this visa fees for Namibia, does it have to be paid at the airport upon arrival, or is it before flying in and getting an e-visa? How is it?
No, I believe these can be paid at the airport, but
Okay,
I don't know whether they've
They've
even
opened a new office on the
officially.
left-hand side called the little visa office. Yeah, a new little office on the left where you're supposed to go and pay the fees.
So paying the fees by cash or by card? The reason,
I think you'll be able to do either, and it's not coming in till April 25. But I think, to Sean's point, it's about communication, and as long as the amount isn't that big a deal, as he says, because incrementally it's a very small percentage,
yes,
but it's more about the convenience. I don't mind having to pay. So long as I would love to know that money was being ring fenced and being spent on promotion of Namibia abroad. That's how I would run a visa scheme, rather than it just going centrally into the government when they're already making money from the tourists. And I would always ask that question of, how many tourists do you lose by having a visa policy versus not? If you think about Seychelles, they have no visa free for everyone, visa on arrival, but it's a high-end destination where they know that that's dwarfed, right?
Let's not go into Seychelles, because Seychelles still requires your pre-registration. And I promise you, if you talk to people from Black African countries as opposed to their preferred African tourism sources, more often than not, they are rejected for their electronic authorities to travel to Seychelles. So Seychelles is a racist place which does not want African tourists, despite the fact that they say that they are open and don't require visas. They don't require visas, they just don't let them in.
Okay. I'll move on swiftly from that one.
Seychelles is bidding for AviaDev 25. I'm sorry, didn't mean that.
So the reason why I asked this question is because I'll give you the example of Nairobi National Park in this context. So Nairobi National Park, which is one of the most famous national parks in Kenya, they used to allow visitors to come in and pay cash at the entrance gate, similar to what the Namibia government is willing to do for tourists to come in. However, due to wide-scale corruption, the government of Kenya stopped allowing any sort of visitors to pay cash to enter Nairobi National Park and moved it purely on card payment basis, because a lot of the staff at the entrance gate were just pocketing the money themselves. So I don't know about Namibia's corruption index and how their immigration officials are at the airport, but I would not trust any immigration official with cash in their hand to manage. If the government wants to make serious money by charging tourists upon arrival, they should insist that all payments should be done in cash. I'll give you my own example at Cairo Airport a few years ago. I stayed there for 24 hours. I paid $25 at the airport for a visa, but it was done through a card payment service. And now at Abidjan Airport also, you can get a visa on arrival by paying through a card payment service, or you can get an ETA from before you arrive. So these are much more secured ways of securing the funds. And that is what I would like to say. I hope the Namibia government does not allow cash to be accepted, because there's a very high probability that some of that cash will be put in someone's pocket without any trace whatsoever. Now, in terms of how will it affect tourist numbers and all, as Sean correctly said, this is a premium leisure destination. So you're going to be spending a lot of money to fly there. Spending an extra $50, $60 for a visa upon arrival is no big deal. It's not. The only thing is, Namibia is not a well-known tourist destination abroad. So those people who are already planning to go to Namibia will be planning. But for travel agents who would be selling Namibia packages, when they see this sort of restriction on there, they might feel a bit uneasy promoting the destination versus promoting something like Kenya or South Africa or Tanzania, where there's absolutely no hassle whatsoever. They can promote.
Kenya, let's not go there. Kenya has had its own share of issues.
Okay. But Kenya, I had no problems just now in March. I just paid $32.
There's no problems. But again, it's the issue of the perception. You go out and say that we are visa free to the world, but you still have to pay for an ETA, even if you didn't have to before. As I said,
Yes. Okay, understood.
it's an issue of perception and reality and the disjoint between them, which is what causes the ill feeling, not the actual visa fee itself. The biggest market in the world for tourists right now is France. And France requires visas for more of the world's population than it doesn't. Yet people still flock there because it is very clear as to what visa you need, how you get it, and how much you have to pay for it. Not this chop and change. We don't need a visa, but we do need a visa and we want the cake and eat it too. France is clear. They do it. Most tourist centers are big because of that. They're clear and have consistent policies. And that is why a lot of African countries lose out on tourist spend because they don't have the coherent visa policy. That is my point. The visa policy itself is less relevant than the coherence and the strategy behind it.
Correct.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm looking forward to the opening of the Mendis Visa Consultation Center, which I'm sure will be opening soon in Malawi, some branches there. But no, I think that's great. I think the last point I'd like to make on this is there's been a lot of conversation because we've seen a lot of images already, again, post-COVID, of over-tourism. And of course, implementing visa regimes to control the amount of tourists that are coming in is a strategy. Now, as Behramjee quite rightly calls out, that is diametrically opposed to where Namibia is, which is it's trying to increase occupancy and get more tourists to come. So it can't be done for that reason because they don't have an over-tourism problem as yet. But it is a country that has a small population, a finite amount of resource. So it has to be very careful with attracting the right type of tourists, the right number of tourists, and getting that sweet spot. And the second thing on that, as a conference organizer, is they're going in very big now for attracting conferences. And they showed absolutely that they can deliver conferences with the work that we did there in Windhoek. And I'm really bullish about that. But obviously, this is another input on a conference organizer is I want to bring my delegates there. So I'm asking them to buy their tickets, buy their accommodation, pay me a fee to come in. Oh, and by the way, there's now a visa charge, even if you're only in the country for a day or two, and you've got to go through this process. That isn't going to help them attract conferences versus a country that is much more liberal with its visa side of things. And exactly what Sean said, unless the way I see a visa is, unless that money is ring-fenced and spent on tourism promotion activities, it's just a tax. It's an arrival tax because it's not going directly into promoting the country. It's just going into the fiscus and it's going to be spent on whatever the government decides. It's a tax rather than a visa. It's the same thing. So let's park that one. We'll watch it. We'll see what happens. Still, I'm expecting these new routes to be announced in the coming weeks and months. And I know the team at NAC are doing their best to do that. And this is a national conversation that is happening right now. Okay, let's move to back over to the east and back over to the Indian Ocean, actually. And let's talk about Emirates coming now to Madagascar via the Seychelles from the 3rd of September 2024. So we know the Ravenala Airports team very well. They were due to host AviaDev in 2020, just before, obviously, the pandemic put pay to that. But they will be doing this 4 times a week on the 777-300. So it's Madagascar via Seychelles from September. Purely leisure-driven. There's VFR, there's trade. I'd like to know a little bit more about what's driving this and what the numbers are. So maybe Behramjee, I don't know whether you've got the numbers, but your thoughts on it. Of course he does.
So another very creative, out-of-the-box idea by the Emirates network planning team. And just like Air France, they've taken the safe way on this route by combining it with a high-volume destination like Seychelles. Is the 777-300ER the right aircraft size for this route? I would say no, because it's a bit too big. The A350-900, which is coming up which is being delivered to Emirates soon, that would be the ideal sized aircraft for both these routes, actually. But that's just my own perspective. Now, in terms of what Madagascar offers, is a mixture of VFR, trade, and business. The main VFR market is France because of its colonial ties. The biggest market is Paris, with 166,382 passengers flew between the two cities last year. And the second biggest market relevant to Emirates is actually its home base of Dubai. And majority of those passengers would be traders originating from Madagascar itself. There were 22,000 passengers that flew between Madagascar and Antananarivo last year. So between Dubai and Madagascar last year. So, and that definitely Emirates will stimulate quite a bit going forward. Apart from that, the other main markets are Mumbai with 19,000, Frankfurt 15,000, Milan 12,000, London 12,000, Guangzhou 11,000. Guangzhou is another pure trading route. Geneva 10,000, Marseille 9,000, Rome 8,000, and Montreal 6,000. Those are the main top markets. So few markets, as you can see, like Dubai, Bombay, Guangzhou, those are main trading routes, while the others like Paris, Marseille, and Rome, they're more VFR traffic, whilst Frankfurt, Milan, London, they're more of a mix of leisure and VFR. So at the end of the day, Emirates for sure will be stimulating this market, no doubt. Could it survive on its own as a dedicated non-stop Terminator flight down the road? That remains to be seen, but that will take at least, I would say, 3 to 4 years, and definitely not on a 777. It has to be on a smaller aircraft. Ideally, this is a perfect 787-8 route, which Emirates has ordered about a dozen or so aircraft. So in the future going forward, Madagascar is definitely a 787-8 sized route for Emirates.
Interesting, yeah. And I think that the Paris route is the Paris O&D is definitely ripe for disruption because it's a very high yielding route for Air France, and it'd be good to have some alternatives to get there.
Also, another thing in Emirates' favor is that Air Madagascar is more or less a basket case. Let's be very honest. It's very unreliable. So Emirates has that in its favor. Passengers would, if Air France is too expensive or full, Emirates would be option B for sure. Because the other main competitor in Madagascar, I would say, Sean, is Turkish Airlines, right? There's no...
Ethiopian
flies daily to...
Madagascar is not a competitor to anything other than themselves, literally, because they keep setting up Madagascar Airlines, Madagascar Airways. I don't know which other permutations and combinations are out there for them to rename or set up subsidiaries. Yeah, no, but I'm gonna just clarify, a couple of things you said. Where you said that the 777-300 is a bit of a large aircraft, and I agree, it is. But if you actually look at the schedule that they're flying, this is an aircraft that used to sit in Seychelles from 1 p.m. till 10 p.m. every day collecting dust. So that plane is just a plane that was not doing anything anyway. Why not put it on a couple-hour hop from Seychelles down to Madagascar with full Fifth Freedom rights, by the way? So they have complete traffic rights between Seychelles and Madagascar. Pick up some local traffic, get some top-up traffic on that, and in fact help the route. I think in that respect, this is about as zero-risk strategy as exists for someone operating a 777-300. If you are going to run if you have a 777-300 to spare, putting it on a Fifth Freedom rights flight to an underserved market during its downtime anyway is that's a slam dunk. So this is one of those, the rare low-hanging fruit that someone like Emirates can find at this stage of their expansion. And I'm sure they're also getting a lot of incentives from Ravinala on this. We know that Ravinala has been aggressive in terms of marketing and trying to get carriers in. I'd say Emirates may even be making a profit on this route without selling a single ticket.
Yes, and also
it could be that much of a slam dunk.
It's very similar to the Miami route in terms of aircraft ground time.
I'll disagree with that Miami-Bogota. I'm not as convinced of the Miami-Bogota because the hassle of people actually going to Bogota will rather fly via Istanbul than go via Miami and have to deal with the whole U.S. immigration.
I'm talking about the aircraft ground time analogy.
Yeah, okay. Ground time. But in terms of you can actually serve Tana from Dubai legitimately with a 1 hour stop in Seychelles. You can't actually fly to Bogota legitimately with that whole rigmarole of disembark, clear customs, do all that in Miami. I see the similarities, but it is not the same thing by any means. So I think it's good. I think Emirates is there. But as you also said, let's not forget that Fly Dubai is also getting 787s. And this is the kind of route that Fly Dubai 787s might actually be interesting to deploy on because while Air France is getting high yield traffic, there's a lot of VFR in that market, which is low yield. And that VFR to go via Fly Dubai into Dubai and then Fly Dubai itself, maybe into some of these secondary markets in Europe. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a way for Fly Dubai 787s to look at somewhere it might want to be deployed. But look, these are all a few years away from now. Let this route start. Let's see how it goes. Let's see how the protectionism in Madagascar, which has traditionally been a major issue for all foreign operators, and I speak as someone who's had issues with the Malagasy government in the past and their protectionist attitude towards foreign operators taking what they view as their business and their birthright. Let's see how that plays, because Emirates has shown from the Emirates of this generation has a much lower tolerance for governments pushing them around, especially in marginal markets, than they have in the past. So Emirates is more of a they don't take shit anymore.
Yeah, they hold the balance of power. Behramjee, I know we're really running out of time, but
one thing
go
which
for
I
it.
forgot to mention is that cargo will be a big surplus for Emirates on this route, both into Madagascar as well as out of Madagascar, because Seychelles has basically no cargo demand except inbound. There's no outbound cargo demand from Seychelles. So definitely that incremental cargo belly demand revenue on this route will help EK a lot with the 777 belly capacity.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, when I visited Madagascar, I went to see this caviar farm that was being set up and these kind of things that is very high yielding. And there's obviously a lot of agriculture and things like that needs to come out of Madagascar as well. Vanilla, jojoba, all these amazing things, right? Yeah, and anybody who gets a chance who's listening to this, make sure you visit, because it is an incredible country. So well done to Tatam, to Zoe, to Julien, to all the team at Ravnala Airports on that. And I think it's a really interesting example. I'm glad we focused on it, where the route development opportunities are being identified by a lack of aircraft utilization. If you can get that fifth freedom, you speak to the airline, or the airline suddenly goes, what could we do with this downtime? Oh, we could fly at X or Y and actually utilize the aircraft. So I think it's a really smart way to look at route development as well. Okay, so we've got a couple more. We're not going to spend loads of time on these, and then we're going to our rumour mill section, because that should be a lot of fun. The first is, of course, every session we have to talk about Ethiopian. So we'll talk about what they're doing in winter. We're not going to go through it in massive detail, but just to give you an overview of some of the new markets, expansions, etc. Sean, you want to start with this one? You want to give us the overview?
I'll jump into it. Delhi doesn't really have a lot of new markets. In fact, I don't think they have a single new market that has really jumped out at me. Yeah, they've got a couple of new domestics, but I think the key that you're seeing in winter is London Gatwick is going to go daily, which is an increase from when they started with 3 times a week just last December. It's going up to daily. Their new Warsaw service is being delinked from, it's currently running via Athens on a 737 MAX. That is now going to run on an A350 via Vienna instead. And all their Brussels flights are going to go non-stop now. So the Vienna-Brussels is getting cut, and that aircraft is now going to go Vienna-Warsaw. So they're going to have Vienna-Copenhagen, Vienna-Warsaw, Brussels non-stop. Also, very interestingly, is they're bringing back of the third bank. We've discussed the third bank for Ethiopian a lot, so I won't go into that now. But they're bringing in a Rome flight on the third bank. So that basically is a 6 a.m. departure from Rome, which arrives at lunchtime in Addis, turns around, goes back to Rome, arrives in the evening. And again, this is something driven by aircraft utility. That aircraft used to sit the whole day on ground in Rome. Instead of that, they're going to fly it back to Addis, connect to that third bank in the afternoon in Addis, and then fly the same plane back to Rome to catch the overnight flight back from Rome to Addis. So it's interesting. It was something they'd done in 2019 just before COVID. Obviously, it got suspended during COVID. It was something that they'd wanted to try in London as well before COVID, but now they actually have a Gatwick schedule which is similar to that. So I think we might see more and more destinations wind up coming onto the third bank like this with Ethiopian. If this is a success, I think Vienna, Athens, things like that, which currently have aircraft sitting on ground or have tag flights on it, might wind up becoming there. Because Ethiopian right now, and this, I spoke to Ethiopian head of this podcast to say anything new happening. And the message I got from multiple people at Ethiopian is we have so many plans, but we don't have enough aircraft. We cannot wait for this new A350-1000s to come in because right now ET is struggling. And if you look all throughout their network, intra-Africa, where they've got wide-body schedules are being downgraded to 737-800s and MAXs because the 800s the 787s have to go elsewhere, long haul. And they're struggling with engines. They're struggling with a lot of supply chain issues as well. So they've had a good summer in terms of performance, but they haven't been able to deliver on all the plans and all the dreams they've had in terms of this. I think they're actually maxed out in terms of fleet utility outside of Africa right now. Long haul, they really are absolutely totally maxed. Oh, and the other thing is that New York is increasing, and I think that goes up to nine times a week now. 5 Newarks and 4 JFK.
But that's just
so
for
5 Newark, so 5 Newark via Lome and 4 JFK.
That's just for 6 weeks, though. Just for the ultra peak period.
So that's the main changes for ET. Other than that, no major network changes for them.
Okay, great. And I think it's to the point that you made with Emirates as well, and we heard about with Qatar too. The balance of power is firmly with the airlines. They're going to fly the routes that make the sense, then the ones that are marginal or where they're getting a bit of hassle or where they've got block funds or whatever it may be. They're just going to say, I don't need that. I'm going to work with the markets that make most sense with the amount of aircraft that I've got. And many of these airlines are in the same position. It's a good place to be for the airline because they can obviously optimize is probably the word rather than maximize, because they would fly more routes if they could. They do more, but they're having to optimize with what they've got. So I think that's a really good point. If there's anything on ET, you feel free to add it, Behramjee, but I wanted to come to you just to quickly outline an airline we don't talk about a lot, Air Côte d'Ivoire. They're going to expand from October. Anything you want to add on ET, and then tell us about what Air Côte d'Ivoire are doing, and then we'll move to the Rumour mill.
Just one thing before I start with Air Côte d'Ivoire. Sean, the configuration of the ET 350-1000, that's not been disclosed as yet, am I right? The cabin configuration?
It has not been officially disclosed, but my understanding is it will have the Safran Optimas up front, which is interesting because previously there was talk about the new seats, but my understanding is, at least from the LOPA level, that the initial plans were it will have the same up front as the 350-900 and then just a larger cabin down the back. So that is my understanding, but no, nothing has been officially said.
So the thing which I would like to say about ET in the winter season is that I've noticed majority of their expansion is Europe focused, which means they're going to be targeting beach and safari destination demand for the winter season, and also for them to fly to Brussels non-stop every day daily as a terminator. I expect SN Brussels market share on their core African routes to suffer a little bit, not too much, but definitely they will be impacting SN Brussels market share on the Congos, Entebbe's, Kigali's, etc., as well as some other cities here and there. Milan and Zurich, I found interesting. They're increasing both the cities as a tag to a daily service, which in a way is good. They should get good high-yield business class demand also from both those cities, even though it's a bit inconvenient for someone to fly 2 stops, but ET is part of Star Alliance, so they have that brand recognition and their frequent flyer program to support it. So overall, I would say it's a aggressive move. The only thing which I was a bit skeptical about is the additional 3 weekly Rome flight departing Addis at 1600. I feel that flight will have directional demand issues, and especially more so after the peak period in mid-January ends, because of the amount of connections that will be possible in one direction, but it will not be possible in the other direction, and more so because it's on a wide body. If it was on a MAX, I would not be too pessimistic, but since it's on a 350 or 787, I feel that new Rome flight will have some directionality issues because of the number of connections that are available in one way, but not the other way around. Sean, you wanted to say something?
I think actually that if you look at which markets are coming off the third bank, you're looking at Johannesburg, you're looking at India, which is an interesting option from Rome in that respect. Because I think Italy to India is a market that we're seeing is significantly underserved. If you're looking at some of the other dynamics, but that's not for an Africa podcast. You look at that, you look at Mombasa, which is 2-way connections with very good connections on the third bank. So it's an interesting move. I think the third bank, really what's keeping that third bank back right now is the lack of the third daily Nairobi. If they can fix that third daily Nairobi issue, which Kenya has been dragging their feet on for ages. I think that would really open up that third bank and maybe allow a lot more of these utility operations out of there. But don't discount it. I think Rome to Mombasa alone is enough to probably make that route work because it is 100% pure.
Utility, I'm not doubting. I'm just doubting the passenger load factor directional wise. So, okay.
Let's talk about very quickly Air Cote d'Ivoire, and then we got
So-
10 minutes for the
So
rumor
Cote
mill.
d'Ivoire, basically, they've announced that they're getting, or they've already gotten 2 or 3 A319s on dry lease. So that has incrementally increased their fleet. And as a result, they've announced some increases across the West African and Central African network for the later part of the summer IATA season, which will continue on into the winter. So the main changes they've announced was Accra being increased from a daily to a double daily service. And they've done this by creating a new hub wave bank from Abidjan. Same thing they've done with Bamako, increasing from 1 daily to 2 daily. So these flights depart Abidjan at 8 in the morning as well as at 3 in the afternoon. The 3 in the afternoon hub wave bank departure Abidjan was already set in stone since many years. But this 8 in the morning departure time from Abidjan is the new hub wave bank that they're creating. Other routes which they have increased are, let's see, we have Conakry, which has been increased to a non-stop service. No more, it's going to be tagged. Monrovia is a new routing for them. Cotonou, just like the Accras and the Bamakos, it's also getting a double daily service, 8 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. And Dakar, once again, goes up to a double daily service, early morning and afternoon departure. And what else? Lomé, same thing, from 1 to 2 daily. Also note that Cotonou, Accra, and Lomé, they are being increased by the Q400, so low risk versus using a 319. Libreville is being changed. It's going to be flying now via Lagos and not via Cotonou. So Cotonou, Libreville, which is a very high volume market, it's getting one less competitor. And Libreville will be increased to a daily service 4 times a week non-stop and 3 times a week via Lagos. And anything else I've missed out on? It says over here, Ouagadougou and Niamey is going to be increased from a daily service to a double daily. So that's about it. But also note the reason why this is happening is because they're probably setting up the platform for the new upcoming Paris flight, which is supposed to start in December, as they're receiving their first A330neo in November. This is basically the precursor to feeding the upcoming Paris flight.
Yeah, great. Good news for West Africa. Yes, Sean.
And I think he's outlined that, and I think just from a perspective, Air Cote d'Ivoire has been a woefully run airline. It has not really had a strategy in terms of its scheduling in the past. I think, as Behramjee's pointed out, they're actually beginning to focus now on a proper hub system. And more importantly, they're timing their flights now to create two-way feed to and from the long-haul joint venture code shares with Ethiopian to New York, which we just mentioned that Ethiopian is increasing. So now all of these markets will have two-way feed via Abidjan from New York with Ethiopian on the long-haul sector connecting to Air Cote d'Ivoire, something they've not always had in the past. Now, there's still issues. Air Cote d'Ivoire, they're not in IATA clearinghouse. They've got a whole lot of issues and want to do things their own ways. So they're not quite becoming a proper network carrier, but they are improving from the basket case they once were. And unfortunately, I don't think that is going to translate into profitability because, I'll never forget the fact that one of their ministers once claimed that they had budgeted to lose 125 million euros, but they only lost 117 million euros. So in reality, it's like they made a profit. And when you approach an airline with that kind of an attitude, you've lost the battle before you start fighting. So that's my views on Air Cote d'Ivoire. Change my mind.
Yeah, that's not great economics, is it, to do it that way? But who is it for us to posit an opinion on?
My only crib about Air Cote d'Ivoire is their cabin configuration of the A330-900neo with a first-class cabin included. I really don't understand that.
If that is your only grumble, Behramjee, you've really not dealt with them a lot, because I have dealt with them, and believe me, I can give you 2 pages of grumbles I have with Air Cote
Okay.
d'Ivoire, both on strategy, implementation, and just their mere
Okay.
existence.
Okay.
Let's watch that one. But like you say, some big moves happening and good news for West Africa, more connectivity, more flights going in, and something very much needed in the region, a bit of cohesion and getting them all back together because we've had so much upheaval in that region. So we're now going to go into our rumour mill section, which is always great fun. We're not going to spend ages on each one, but we are going to, well, we might do, who knows? Sean's sort of doing a little dance now, so who knows? So let's start with Etihad. So we talked about Etihad starting Nairobi, then postponing it, then not starting it, then nobody knows. So what is the latest on Etihad to Nairobi? Sean?
It is not happening. It is officially withdrawn. It was initially, literally, online check-in was opening for this on the 1st of May. Then they canceled the flight. Then they postponed the flight by a month to June. Then they postponed the flight again till September. And now the flight has disappeared as if it never existed. Etihad's website has even taken the press release announcing those flights off. So there is a definite mea culpa here. Somebody at Etihad screwed up immensely. I am not going to name names, but we all know who it is. And yeah, I think they were just very overconfident. And I think if you're overconfident about going into the Kenya market, you are a fool, because Kenya is not an easy market to get your traffic rights for. Don't start counting the chickens till they have hatched and the ink is dry on your permit.
Oh,
So
very
yeah,
good.
that's what happened to Etihad with Nairobi. But the reality is we'll probably never hear the truth.
Yeah. All right, great. So that's that one done and dusted. Behramjee, Uganda Airlines to Gatwick. We're hearing lots of rumours around this. It was identified as a pretty good market from our market study that we did with Airbus as well. Entebbe, London, I think they still would like Heathrow. But yeah, do you want to start us off on that? And then I think Sean's got quite a lot to add as well.
So, to begin with, the Entebbe London market point-to-point demand historically is high. It was 77,000 passengers last year, so they have a good base load to feed upon. More so because nobody flies it non-stop. Now, with regards to this London Heathrow versus Gatwick syndrome that their government has, it's a bit childish in my view. Yes, everybody would love to fly to Heathrow. If you can't get Heathrow slots, you have to have a plan B. In any business, you have to have a plan A and a plan B. And more so, since they would have a monopoly on this route, Gatwick is not a bad option B. So this mentality, it has to be Heathrow or nothing, is quite unprofessional, quite childish. Again, the most important thing that Uganda Airlines management has to realize is connecting London via Entebbe to East Africa and South Africa. If they're just going to be focused on the Ugandan market for London, that route will be a massive failure, and then some people will be made scapegoats, unfortunately. The good thing is they're not in a hurry, though actually some people do think they're in a hurry, but they should launch the route ensuring that connections are available in both directions to at least 5 to 6 big volume cities via Entebbe, like Harare, Dar es Salaam, Nairobi, Johannesburg, Lusaka, etc. Otherwise, it's going to be a very painful journey for them. The onboard product is good.
Yeah.
The aircraft size is ideally suited. The economics of the aircraft is also quite good. But again, they need the feed. They cannot rely on point to point. This is not a market the size of, say, Dakar, Paris, or Lagos, London, that could rely on point to point traffic. This is less than 100,000 passengers. Even if it flies 3 times a week, it cannot rely on point to point. So,
Sean?
I completely agree with you on that front, but let's look at the reality. Uganda Airlines still does not have slots to London Gatwick. Yeah. They did not apply for the slots for London Gatwick. They only applied for Heathrow, which they did not receive. And therefore, now they're going to have to wait until the end of August for slot handbacks before they can even get slots at London Gatwick. And that is just, as you said, childish. It is piss poor planning. And I've told it to them to their face, so they know that I've said that. If they want to launch, they're going to have to launch before a peak season. if they're going to have to wait till the end of August to get their confirmed slot, that means they're only going to have 2 months of lead time, which is not a good idea. If I were them, I would start looking at summer next year as a potential launch. You are absolutely right in terms that they need to have a feeder strategy, which right now they're going to need to work on timings, which means even slots then are not going to be just a case of whatever we can get, which they'll get the scraps from the table right now, which means they're going to have to almost certainly focus primarily on just O&D, which means they will start losing money, which means they will make even worse decisions, and that will just go to hell in a handbasket. Johannesburg is a potential great market. You can sell Johannesburg, London with infinite capacity as long as the price is low enough. The problem is that Johannesburg flights are still on a CRJ. Why? Because as Ade, the chief commercial officer, mentioned at AviaDev, and is still the case right now, the South African Civil Aviation Authority has decided that a South African registered aircraft cannot fly to South Africa without going through a full public comment process to allow them to lease that aircraft to a foreign carrier to fly back to the country in which it is registered. That is the most asinine and South African thing I have ever heard of. This is cutting off your nose, not just to spite your face, but to spite the nose as well. Nobody wins from this. Everybody loses. And it's what's happening. The problem, unfortunately, with Uganda Airlines is, once again, these decisions have been made without looking at the potential ramifications or the potential problems. If you look at the history of this airline, they took delivery of A330s when they did not have them on their op spec. Those planes were the world's most expensive paperweights for a year. Once again, they now have an aircraft on wet lease with a high number of minimum monthly guaranteed hours from Global, which they don't have routes to deploy on. It flies to Lagos, it flies to Kinshasa, it flies to Nairobi. That is not giving you the kind of utility you need for that. They also were supposed to rotate crew in Johannesburg, which they're not able to do. So they've got travel costs. They've got everything else, which is taking what was a brilliant deal into a bad deal because somebody screwed up and didn't get the right permits in advance or didn't identify that there might be a need for permits in advance. And this, I'll blame the Ugandan government, because the Ugandan government tries to micromanage this airline so badly that good ideas wind up becoming bad ideas because they sit on the table for so long and get modified so much that they no longer make sense from the original reason they were conceived. So yeah, Uganda Airlines, they're screwed.
Okay, let's stay with them, because in the rumour mill, we've also got a rumoured order. We've heard a few of these over the last few months. This one is 4 A320 Neos and 2 787s, but number one, they're talking about having to wait forever for these anyway. But Sean, you are bursting. Go.
Right now, if you ordered an A320 Neo or a 787, you're going to get delivery in 2032.
787 also?
If Uganda Airlines is still around in 2032, there's a miracle that has occurred. Because the way they are running themselves right now, 2028 is going to be a stretch for them, let alone 2032. So don't waste your money on this kind of rubbish. And to be perfectly honest, again, talking to them, the first that they have heard that they are ordering this is when they read the press release from the president's office, rather than them actually having been involved with, hey, I'm going to order this. They have put out an RFP for aircraft. We know this. This is public knowledge in the industry. But neither Airbus nor Boeing knows that they have originally ordered these aircraft, which the president's office says they have. So once again, this is where government airlines, my goodness, people, please, if you are a government, stop interfering and micromanaging your airlines. This is why they screw up. Thank you.
Yes, Behramjee.
Now, just to tone it down a bit with regards to this order that they're planning to do, apart from the government interference, ordering 2 787s alongside having 2 A330s is quite silly and foolish. It's like having 2 eyes to take care of at the same time with different habits and different requirements. So it's going to be a very big headache for them operationally if it materializes. The sensible thing is, if they really want to expand their wide-body fleet, is to get 2 more A330s, preferably A330-900 Neos and not -800 Neos, if they have the budget for that. because having a fleet of two 787 and two 330s makes no commercial sense whatsoever. I know Sean will not agree with them even buying two more.
Yes, I think
No, I
it make
know.
commercial sense, Behramjee. Why are you applying logic to people in the asylum?
Another advantage of having an additional two A330 Neos instead of the 787 because with the A320 Neo, the pilots can fly both types of aircraft because of the CCQ qualification. So that helps their operational planning department properly. But yes, when I see stuff like this,
Operational planning department.
okay, Sean, no, just relax. When I see these decisions being made by government-owned airlines, especially when it comes to fleet planning, it does hurt me because I see wasted potential and waste and money thrown down the drain just for some other political purposes, which does not fit right, especially for people like us who are very passionate about the industry and very keen on fleet planning in particular.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make. We all want successful airlines, and this is money that could be spent on education, roads, infrastructure. And if it is going to be spent because there is a need and that's been identified, it needs to be spent, it needs to be accountable, and it
Yes.
needs to be done properly. So I think that's very good. And I think all I was going to say there, Behramjee, when you said, "Oh, I'm going to calm it down," I thought you were going to give us a animal stat about Bwindi
No.
National Park or something. So I'm a little bit disappointed that you haven't got any lion anecdotes from Uganda or gorillas, which is
No,
my
I
thing.
don't know that much
so,
about
yeah,
Uganda national parks as yet, to be very honest with you. The only thing
that's
about
fantastic.
Uganda, which I know, one of my favorite all-time movies is The Last King of Scotland, which is on Idi Amin.
Which you should not take as gospel, by the way, because you should actually do the research because it's
No, I
not
know,
very
but
accurate. But it's great fun, and
yes,
Forrest
I
Whitaker
enjoyed
does a
that
great
movie a
job.
lot.
But yeah, me too. And then I actually did some reading and realised how wrong it was.
I will just say that when I ran an airline in Uganda, one of my board of directors was the former cabinet minister under the Amin government, and some of the stories I got from him were more outlandish than portrayed in the movie, and he was not as much as a buffoon either as he was portrayed in the movie. So I think the reality was more extreme than was portrayed, but was more extreme on both ends of it, both on the buffoonery as well as on some of the actual extremes. And I think that is the sad reality of Uganda's history in that respect. But he also collapsed a national airline pretty much, and I think that's probably going to happen again sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, okay. We've been on for a long time, so we haven't got too many more to go. One that's quite quick is Singapore applying for Durban. Singapore Airlines applying for Durban. That was quite spotted by you, Sean.
Yeah, Singapore Airlines has applied to get passenger rights there as per the bilateral agreement to Durban, Cape Town, and Johannesburg. They've been applying Cape Town and Johannesburg. Cape Town is a tag to the Joburg flights. They're adding Durban to their license, subject to no issues with the Air Service Licensing Council. Nothing is going to happen anytime soon. Might happen sometime, maybe a year from now, whatever. I think Behramjee was right in our background discussions where he said the reality is Johannesburg can probably command enough O&D direct capacity. Cape Town and Durban might make sense to combine in that respect. It would be a low-risk option, flying to Cape Town via Durban rather than Cape Town via Johannesburg, and it would allow them to get more traffic out of Johannesburg, especially to Australia, because the South Africa to Australia market is continuing to grow. And especially with SAA also stimulating that market, Qantas looking at bringing in additional routes as well. I think that would probably be why they're looking at Durban, because Durban, Singapore, Australia would be definitely preferred to Durban, Middle East, Australia, which is currently where people are going, or Durban, Johannesburg, Australia, all of which are backlinks.
Yeah, absolutely. Behramjee, you put in our notes
Yes,
that you
please.
wanted to talk a little bit about Air Canada to West Africa. So
No.
don't spend too long. We can go into
That's
it
fine.
deeper next time, but I'm just conscious of all our listeners are still hanging on after an hour and 40 minutes. And we did promise it would be a bumper episode.
Last time, I believe you all discussed about Air Canada's potential in West Africa. There was one point which you all did not discuss about this, which I would like to focus on. Air Canada has an excellent hub for US connections via Toronto and Montreal. I experienced that firsthand myself this summer. For the first time, I flew from Toronto via Vancouver to Las Vegas, and it was seamless. There was no issue whatsoever. I even saw passengers coming in from other cities from Asia, transiting via Vancouver to go into Las Vegas. No problems whatsoever. So Air Canada, yes, there are some very big markets in West Africa that has good potential for them, especially now with the 321 XLR coming up soon, just like Dakar, Montreal. Dakar, Montreal, by the way, last year, the demand exploded to 37,000 passengers point to point. So with the 321 XLR, with a flight that is about 7.5, 7 hours, 45 minutes nonstop, a 3 weekly service does make economical sense, because via Montreal, not only will it connect to domestic Canada, but also to the main Senegalese high volume destinations on the east coast of America, like JFK, Washington, Boston, and Chicago, and Detroit. But the main potential for Air Canada in West Africa is Lagos and Accra. Lagos with 93,000 passengers, Accra with 33,000. But again, their focus will not be just on point to point. They will aggressively target New York, Chicago, Texas, Florida, Calgary, and California from Nigeria and Accra via the Toronto hub. The only thing is, passengers who will be traveling to the States will obviously need to have the relevant documentation in place. So they'll need to have a US visa or a Canadian passport, but that majority of those passengers will already have that. So that's where Air Canada has a very big advantage versus, say, a US carrier like Delta, whereby the passenger flying Accra, JFK, Toronto would have to clear immigration at JFK, take their baggage, recheck in their baggage, redo security at JFK, and then go to the gate. Whereas you don't have to do any of that drama in Toronto or Montreal. So from a passenger convenience point of view, and Air Canada has marketed that very well in Europe, that should be to their benefit. But I do not foresee them flying into Lagos until a lot of issues are sorted out, and plus the security team needs to give them clearance. I see them entering Dakar and Accra much before they enter Lagos, though Lagos has the best potential for them.
Okay.
But I wanted to focus on this.
Behramjee, I'm going to actually contradict you.
Bolo.
Yeah, I'm going to contradict you completely on the ease of going through a Canadian hub for transfers, because, as you say, the documentation is a pretty big deal. It's not a big deal for passengers coming from Europe or those which are visa-free and just require an ETA for Canada. But if you are trying to get a transit visa, just a visa to change planes in Canada, traveling, say, from Accra, Toronto, Las Vegas, to use your example, there is a current wait time of over 1 year to get a visa to change planes in Toronto.
No, but that's not the market.
Year.
But
You
that's not the
submit your
market.
paperwork, pay your $60, and wait 1 year for that to come back. 1 year, Behramjee. People don't book 1 year in advance. You can buy your ticket today. Your ticket will expire before they even give you a yes or no that you can change planes. I'm sorry. That is not a convenient hub. That is not a hub. That is
but that's not the passengers I feel they will be targeting. The passenger will be flying via Toronto to the US from West Africa would obviously be, majority would be US passport holders. It will not be.
No, they won't. No, they won't. And that is the reality. If you actually look at the growth, say if the growth in the Nigeria to Canada market, the growth is coming.
Yes.
Certainly, there's more on the North American side, but the larger growth is coming on the Nigerian.
Yes, I agree with that. But I'm just saying the incremental traffic that they will get for Chicago, etc., that will be mainly US passport holders. It won't be Nigerian passport holders, I feel, flying them.
I do not agree. If you look at it, if you look at historically what that Air Canada hub has been able to do, they only compete on price. People fly Air Canada not out of choice or convenience. They fly Air Canada because they're cheaper than flying on the US carriers. Given a choice, anyone traveling from the US to anywhere in the world will not transit via Canada unless it is significantly cheaper. And the reality is, when you start having to discount those yields even further with those tag legs, I'm sorry. If they're going to make it work, they're going to make it work on Canadian demand. They're not going to make it work out of US demand. I do not agree with your
that the
hypothesis
base load will be Canada demand. But as you correctly said, a Nigerian passport holder flying to the US, majority will fly Delta or United for obvious reasons. But those which have a US passport,
So the majority will actually fly by
No,
Europe.
majority of the demand is still on the non-stop flights of United and Delta.
I would say that if you combine all US
If you
markets, you'll see
combine
the
all
majority is
US
actually going
markets,
through Europe.
but I'm talking about
You may
the
see,
main
yeah,
trunk ones,
yeah.
Delta and United still has a
If you look at all US markets that Air Canada serves, you will probably see that
yes,
more
yes,
demand is
but
going via Europe right now. And that demand via Europe is visa free through Europe and will not be displaced by Air Canada. They're not going to compete with non-stops. Certainly, if you look at JFK, Atlanta, and Washington, the OND will
yeah,
go on the non-stops. But if you're looking at the secondary markets, which are the ones you're
yes,
targeting, the Chicagos, the Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and so forth, those traffic are not going to be displaced via Europe through Canada because the issues with Canada and transit in Canada are a negative, not a positive, as you
no,
were pointing out.
Well, I think let's park this one and let's come back to it because I think it's a really
no,
good
no.
conversation about which markets and where we're going to go. So have a think about your riposte,
I,
Behramjee, and we can maybe you
what
can write a post about
I'm
this after
basically
you've
focused on the
digested all of
U.S.
this.
passport holders of Nigerian and Ghanaian origin. That's the
Okay.
incremental traffic.
Yeah.
I know it's not going to form the core passenger profile. Obviously, Air Canada is not like AirAsia X. They will have a proper base load demand for the point-to-point market before venturing into a new long-haul service. Otherwise, they will not think about places like Dakar, Accra, or Lagos. So the point-to-point market is there to form that core base load. The US traffic is pure incremental demand, but it is useful incremental demand for them. What I'm just trying to say is that those passengers that have US passports, that is the mark. That is a segment that Air Canada will be aggressively tapping into with, as Sean correctly said, low fares and attractive fares on offer, and plus convenient transit times. Because at the end of the day, it is faster to fly, for example, Accra, Toronto, Chicago versus Accra, Europe, Chicago.
All right. All right.
Not
Sean,
going
leave it.
to,
Leave it.
not
You're going to
going
get the
anymore.
last word.
Hmm.
You're going to get the last word. So the very, very last thing to talk about today is Emirates to Nigeria has finally, we have a date. We have an announcement. Go for it. Tell us.
October 1st. I predicted it in
No, November
the
1st, no?
last podcast we did. I says it was coming any day, and it has come. October 1st, Emirates will relaunch flights
Isn't it
to
November 1st?
Lagos. October 1st, Baba.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah.
I know.
Okay.
No, it's not season. It's
No,
not.
Behramjee's
I had
checking
Oh.
now. He's checking.
It's October.
November 1st. That'd be my birthday present. That'd be good.
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic.
I was the first person to read the press release when it came out. I was literally on this one. So yes, I put my money down. I said $20 says it's gonna happen, and it happened.
Okay.
So take it to the bank.
Wow, $20 from Sean. That's a big one. It's a big bet. I don't know what type of dollars. These Zimbabwean dollars, Namibian dollars. What sort of dollars are these, Sean?
Yeah.
There you go.
Exactly.
Will it buy me a visa?
All right. Right, guys. I think we're done for today. 1 hour, 48 minutes of great conversation. Thank you so much. It's always brilliant. We've been all around the continent. We've been all around the different subject matters. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with us, for joining us today. I know a lot of people have been waiting for this for quite a few weeks. Our idea is to obviously wrap up the story, provide some commentary. And obviously, if you did enjoy the conversation and the idea is you're informed, you're entertained, you've learned something, do share it with somebody in your network you think would benefit from having a listen, and do subscribe to the podcast. It will forever be free. We've got lots planned over the coming months and years in terms of content as well. And obviously, this will be a big anchor point for us because we know people really do enjoy it. I'm sure we didn't cover all the announcements, so please do share that with any of us when you see something. We always keep tabs on it so that we can build up our bank of conversation ahead of the episodes. But yeah, and you can get in touch with any of our panelists directly as well. I'll put some links in the show notes. But until then, we will see you soon. Any final words from anybody? Anything we missed that's burning a hole, or are we happy to let the guys go? Sean is finally zipping his mouth. That's good. What about you, Behramjee? All good?
Just that I read somewhere that Saudi did not end up launching the Abuja route. Am I right? I was a bit surprised at that.
I've not paid attention to it since we last discussed it. So maybe
That's one for next episode, I think, to have a think about that and dive into that market and have a look at that. But I think there's been a lot of announcements, a lot of positivity. What I'm hoping on the next episode is, of course, we can link some of these back to some of the conversations and meetings that happened at AviaDev. Because as I said, we delivered 1,200 meetings between airline planners and the airports and the tourism boards as well. So 1,200 meetings, you're bound to get something coming out the back of it. And we're hearing some very positive news from our hosts in Namibia, but lots of others as well that I've heard anecdotally. It's not that we play the role in putting these people together, but we play a role in bringing the conversations forward and trying to build that connectivity for Africa and develop the economic sustainability of both the airlines and the countries themselves. Yeah, we're on a mission. We're a long way from achieving it, but we're having great fun along the way. As you can tell, we're all very passionate about seeing this come to fruition. So we'll see you all for the next episode very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.